presidential candidates of over 6 political parties. And today, we will be talking to the candidate of the African Action Congress, Omoyele Sowore. I have with me on this interview panel my colleagues, and we shall be meeting them very shortly. But before we go on to the interaction with Sowore, let us, as usual, get to meet him. Who is the gentleman called Omoyele Sowore? Let's have a bit of his profile.
Omoyele Sowore, born 16 February 1971, is a human rights activist, pro-democracy campaigner, founder of online news agency Sahara Reporters, and presidential candidate of the African Action Congress. Omoyele Sowore is an indigene of Ilaje, Ondo State in southwest Nigeria. Sowore was born in the Niger Delta region of the country, where he was also raised, to a polygamous family of 16 children. At 12, he learned how to ride the motorcycle so that he could fish at the lake for the entire family before going to school every morning. Sowore studied geography and regional planning at the University of Lagos from 1989 to 1995, with his academic program extended by 2 extra years after being expelled twice for political reasons and student activism. He was the president of the University of Lagos Student Union government between 1992 and 1994, where he was keenly involved in anti-courtism and anti-corruption advocacy. Sowore holds a master's degree in public administration from the Columbia University. He also played a key role in the actualization of the June 12 mandate. Sowore led 5,100 students in protest against the Nigerian government in 1992. The protest resulted in police opening fire and 7 persons being killed. Sowore was arrested and tortured. Omoyele also got involved in the demand for democratic government taking over from the military. In 1993, this resulted in several arrests, detentions, and life-threatening treatment by government officials. He started Sahara Reporters in a small room in Manhattan in 2006 to fight corruption and wrong government practices. Sahara Reporters is supported by grants donated by the Ford Foundation and Omidia Foundation. As part of its policy, the medium does not accept adverts and financial support from the Nigerian government. On February 25, 2018, Sowore announced his intention to run for the position of president in the 2019 general election. In August 2018, he founded a political party, the African Action Congress, on which platform he will run for presidency.
Right, thank you so much for staying with us, Face the Nation. And 2 of my colleagues are here with me. Amos Dunia is the executive editor of Forefront Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us, Amos. And also joining us is Philip Iam, who is a political correspondent of the New Telegraph newspaper. Philip, thank you for joining us. Our guest is Omoyele Sowore, who is the presidential candidate of the African Action Congress, AAC. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for bringing me.
Well, we must apologize very sincerely for bringing the program to you a few minutes behind schedule. But here, Sowore is here with us now, and it's time to find out why he is running for the presidency of Nigeria.
Thank you for bringing me once again, and good evening to Nigerians. I am running to become the president of Nigeria in 2019 because for 58 years since independence, this country has been governed by leaders who do not understand the country Nigeria, who do not understand its people, and apparently has not had interest of the people at heart. And I have been through 7 presidents in my lifetime since 1989 when I entered the University of Lagos, and have seen how the last president was better than the next one up until today, because there is standards for running a government has been completely absent. And where we are today is that Nigeria has been left broke, with huge unemployment numbers, with children out of school, becoming a country where you are likely to die before you reach the age of 5, and recently became the country which is the poverty capital of the world, whereas other West African countries or other sub-Sahara African countries are doing better than us. We are getting worse. But we stand here deceiving ourselves that these things will change if we don't change the players who are gaming us in this country. And people like me who have always stood on the side thinking that we can help them shake the trees when the fruits are ripe would have a different country if we don't step into the ring. I've suddenly realized that we are deceiving ourselves. I'm 47 years old. The people who fought for independence in Nigeria started doing it in their 20s. The Azikiwes, the Awolowos, and the Ahmadu Bellos, the Tafawa Balewas made this country even a better country in their 20s. As a matter of fact, President Buhari was 34 years old when he was the Minister of Petroleum Resources. There were refineries then. He came back 40 years later. He can't fix the refineries. The former Vice President, who is the PDP presidential candidate, Atiku, ran for presidency in 1992 when I was in the university. The Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria today has been around since the days of Lugard. I'm talking about Audu Ogbe. I'm just exaggerating there. These guys have no ideas. I'm not quarreling against their age. I'm quarreling against the age of their ideas and the fact that they have no capability. If you leave this country in their hands, in their care for the next 40 years, they have nothing else to offer. So it is for those of us who want to see a different country, who want to change this country, and I'm not talking about the fraudulent change they brought 4 years ago, real revolutionary change, to step into the ring, fix this country by putting in power or in position of authority by election people who know how to do things right. And I have done things right for 30 years, and my records are there for people to question, to query, to interrogate, and understand that you're talking to a person of integrity who can take this country to prosperity and progress starting from next year.
Talking about your records.
Yes.
Many will ask, what are those records that you are talking about? Many will say, you do not have any experience in government and governance. You have not held any public office before. Where are you going to tap that experience that you need to run a country as large and as diverse as Nigeria?
It's very interesting that people swear on that. Then it would have meant that people who had the experience you're talking about would have done this country differently. President Buhari, for example, was the president of this country before. President Olusegun Obasanjo was the president of this country before. If you want to count their experience as the experience we need, they should have been the most experienced leaders. But look at where they left this country. The people that I've mentioned in the past who fought for independence, ask yourself, where did they get political experience? Which public office did Awolowo hold before he fought for independence? Which public office did they hold before they became regional leaders that all of us are jealous of today? When Gowon became the president of this country and fought through a war, which political office did he hold before he became the president at the age of 29 or thereabout? None. We're talking about character. Countries that are looking for leaders that will take them to progress are not looking for people who have experience in stealing or assassination or deception. They are looking for people with character. Countries vote for presidents with character. They don't vote for presidents with useless political experiences. I do not need to have been in public office, but here is what I want to tell you about my experience. Every time it was necessary to find somebody to fight for the progress of this country when we needed democracy, as a student activist, I was there. Laid my life, on the ground for whatever could happen. And in 1999, that democracy came about. When there was a time in this country that everybody said if Obasanjo didn't become the president the third time, this country will not make progress. I was one of the few people who stood up and said, third time is unacceptable because we can't afford a Mugabe in this country. When President Yar'Adua was sick and was dying and there was a cabal around him that prevented a minority from becoming president, and all of the political leaders, including judges in this country, including parliamentarians, the Senate, the House of Representatives, even a young person at that time who was Speaker, Bankole, sided against Jonathan becoming president. I used Sahara Reporter to expose the fact that Jonathan was brain dead and Nigeria needed to prepare for it. Not even the Niger Delta militants could do it, even though they said he was their man at that time. We're talking about character here. We're talking about courage that could take countries to bigger levels. And I'll give you two more examples of countries that had people of my pedigree. I'm not as big as they are. Mandela came directly from prison. Which local government did he govern before he became the president of South Africa? The most stabilizing force in the history of that country. Obama was regarded as a community organizer. Somebody might say he was a senator, but it was just for 6 months. But he was known as a community organizer and derided for it. He stabilized America's economy for 8 years that he was in America. He's described as America's best president because it wasn't because he was a former senator, but because he was a man of character, intellect, capacity. And that is the mistake we must not make. You cannot continue to have people who do not have ideas, people who have no character, people who have no capability, boast about experiences that failed us, and we are shouting experience. I don't understand what experience you need more than that of a 30-year-old experience that I have. I'm 47 years old. Nigeria is 58 years. Out of 58 years, I've dedicated 30 of my years on earth fighting for what is just and right. There's no political event in the last 30 years that took place that I wasn't part of. Which experience do you need more?
Okay, gentlemen.
Mr. Shore, you are most welcome once again.
Thank you so much, sir.
You alluded to the U.S., where you have both structures and institutions working.
Yes.
Here in Nigeria, such do not take place. Do you think you'll be able to use the same parameters that the leaders in U.S., South Africa you alluded to?
When Mandela became the
let me finish,
yes,
if you give me a chance.
No problem.
Do you think you can use the same parameters that are used in these nations in Nigeria that is so complex and has refused to grow beyond what you think? Minus that, you said during your opening that each leader we have is worse than the
last person. Yes.
If you are to tell me in details, what indices did you use to arrive at your conclusion?
Well, I'll start with your last position. I read in the newspaper today that President Goodluck Jonathan is calling Buhari incompetent. You know, we used to call him incompetent. In fact, the economists describe him as a buffoon at a point. This is the Economist newspaper. But he is so comfortable today that he could call his successor incompetent. That's just to tell you, because this one is contemporary. You know, but let me go back to the issues you raised. You see, institutions and structures are not built on their own. They are built by men of character. When you are talking about the U.S., what is keeping the U.S. going is not just those institutions. It's the character of men that are occupying institutions, or those ones who have historically built the institutions. If you look at the U.S. today, if the U.S. were to be Nigeria, Mueller would have been sacked. I mean, the special prosecutor, I mean, the special counsel who is looking into the Russian meddling with the election. It's not as if President Donald Trump can't sack him. But the country's conscience, which is behind this institution, its history and pedigree, will not allow that to happen. Men who are working with him, who have to advise him, who know that there will be consequences if they even give such an advice, will not allow him to do that, because they know that there are chains of commands that will suffer for it if that were to happen. But you talk about South Africa. When Mandela came, South Africa was an apartheid state. It was the courage of his conviction and morality that helped to open up the space for black participation. If it wasn't Mandela, it would have been a different story. So the institutions are there. They are still there today. But it took one man, Mandela, to change South Africa from an apartheid state to a democratic state. Those are what we talk about. That's why I'm not here talking about my years as a student union leader, which could count for experience, because I did better than most state governors when I was a student leader, honestly, in this country. Because at the time in this country, the duty of bringing about democracy, which was what was most important for Nigeria, was on our shoulders when we were in our 20s. But there were military administrators all over the place who were jostling around stealing money. There were civilians who were helping the military suppress our democratic aspirations. But nobody counted that as experience. That is experience. I tell people, if I were to be an army in the army, I would have been retired by now as a full-star general, going by the number of wars I fought and the scars that I had to show for 30 years of consistently fighting. But here, who cares? You know, people are looking at those who destroyed the country, and we are rewarding them on a daily basis with socio-political promotions. We are giving them titles. We called some of them GCON, GCFR, and you look at what they did, they destroyed this country. But for those of us who have fought on the side of rights, what do we get? We get derided. They ask me, where's your experience? Some people will even ask me, why don't you go and run for local governments? You understand? And this country is being run by people who never did half of what I did. In fact, in honesty, and history can bear me witness, even though they don't teach them in schools anymore, when so many of these characters were hiding under their bed in the 90s, we were fighting on the streets for democracy that they are now benefiting from. And I can mention their names one after the other, but there won't be time for it, and that's not what we are here for. I'm here to project to you why I'm going to be your best president ever if you make the right choice next year.
Now, Philip, before you come in, let me ask, when you formed your choice of the AAC as a political platform to run on?
Well, you know,
What does the AAC stand for as of today?
That is the African Action Congress. And the reason we chose the word Africa is that we are looking beyond Nigeria, because the entire African continent is actually looking up to Nigeria. In fact, the black race is looking up to Nigeria to be liberated so that they can find their own meaning and dignity as well. That's why the word Africa is there. And because Africa, of course, needs action, we must match all of our rhetoric with action for us to make the progress we want to make. Look, I was in South Africa recently, and I was invited on an interview. I spoke for 5 minutes. They shut down the interview. What was I saying? I said, look, the moment I become the president of Nigeria, the treatment you made out to Nigerians will stop. They were scared. They don't want somebody to say that. They didn't understand that the president of Nigeria is practically the president of Africa. And I'm not trying to be for workers. So it's to put pressure on these governors and help let everybody know transparently how much you're getting. You know, listen, as we're sitting here today, you can never hear that a governor failed to pay himself the security vote and in any month. It has never happened before. And these security votes are in millions, in some cases billions of naira. Almost 50% of what the minimum wage of workers are in those states. You know, I would